Trump wants to achieve peace in Ukraine and his supposed peace plan has now leaked. I think it's disastrous, but we'll look at what is currently being said for the peace plan to be, what are the points in it, and what will those actually mean for Ukraine and the world. All of this here in this video. Surfshark VPN is sponsoring this channel for this month. If you want to bypass geo-blocking or hide your internet activity all with a convenient app, then use Surfshark VPN for just $2.09 a month by using my link. You get 4 months extra as well. Thank you, Surfshark, for sponsoring this channel. The Daily Mail has published this article talking about the, as they say, leaked peace plan that is going to be published fairly soon. I'll just go quickly through what it entails here. Ceasefire with Easter. With the Easter celebrations. Trump wants to achieve Zelensky's agreement to a ceasefire on the 20th of April. Ukraine would be barred from NATO membership, not just for the next 20 years, but permanently. In territorial terms, Ukraine will be asked to accept sovereignty of Russia over the annexed territories and to retreat from Kursk. There will be a demilitarized zone with European troops, potentially British as well, but no US troops according to the reports. And there will be international reconstruction aid from the European Union that are estimated to be at a level of 486 billion US dollars over the next 10 years. The timetable for the supposed agreement will be that in beginning of February, there will be a phone call between Zelensky and Putin. So within the next few days, at the end of February until early March, there would be a meeting of the two. And on the 20th of April, the ceasefire would be declared. On the 9th of May, a mere 20 days later, it would be published, and it would mean the end of martial law and of mobilization that is part of the plan. It would include additional US military aid as well as a path to US citizenship, to US membership until 2030. First of all, we have to ask whether this plan that the Daily Mail has published here, that supposedly leaked, whether it's true. And there I checked that according to ground news here, the news are that supposedly Trump wants to publish his peace plan on the Munich Security Conference in the next days. There are a lot of sources about this, but at the same time, they're also saying that supposedly, no, that's not true. It's not going to be published on the Munich Security Conference. And apart from the Daily Mail, so far, there were only 2 other articles publishing that supposedly the plan has leaked. And this shows you why I have Ground News Today's as an advertisement partner. In times of high political polarization, understanding the position of the other side is essential in order to see the topic comprehensively illuminated. That's why I use Ground News. It has a great blind spot feature that shows me here, for example, that Putin is complaining that the Soviet role in the liberation of the death camps is being ignored. Here we can see that his statement has been completely ignored by left-wing media. If I only consumed left-wing media, I would have never noticed this. Ground News is a news aggregator that clearly highlights how differently left and right-leaning outlets report on the same event. It not only helps me by allowing me to set notifications for specific topics and prepare better for situation reports, but also by giving me a multi-sided view of topics, ensuring I don't stay confined to an echo chamber. This is specifically important today. Ground News is now offering my viewers a 40% discount on the Vantage plan, which I personally use for unlimited access. Simply visit ground.news/military history or scan the QR code to subscribe to Ground News. By doing so, you also support this channel. So let's go through the individual topics of the peace plan that is being published here by the Daily Mail. We start off with the ceasefire. About the ceasefire itself, there's little to say. Obviously, it would stop the killing and the dying, but a ceasefire for the sake of a ceasefire would probably be harmful for Ukraine. The reason why we've talked about quite a lot of time in the past on this channel. About NATO, if it actually means that NATO membership for Ukraine will be denied permanently, this is a big Russian success and would take Ukraine the security it actually needs, and it would take it permanently. Now, the most interesting part and the most decisive part would be in territorial terms, to accept the sovereignty of Russia over the annexed territory. This would have an extremely impact. We can see it here in the article: a ban on Ukraine from joining NATO and a demand for Kiev to accept Russian sovereignty on annexed land. This means that Ukraine would accept publicly, by law and in international recognition, that the Crimean Peninsula, that Donetsk, that Luhansk, that Zaporizhia, that Kherson are parts of Russia. So this here is Kherson, this is Zaporizhia, this is Donetsk, and this is Luhansk. All of them have been illegally annexed by Russia, and if Ukraine is accepting the sovereignty of Russia and not just the occupation, then this would mean that they acknowledge, okay, this is a legitimate part of Russia. Ukraine, if this actually means this, then Ukraine would have to abandon those areas. It would have to evacuate it. They would have to hand over all this territory to the Russians, and including, which would be of extremely strategic importance, Kherson, the annexed part on the west bank of the Dnipro River, meaning the Russians would not have to do a river crossing against an opposition in case of a future escalation of the war itself. It would also mean that Ukraine would lose additional territory, including the cities of Kherson with 275,000 inhabitants at the beginning of the war, the city of Zaporizhia with 706,000, the city of Kramatorsk with 147,000, and the city of Sloviansk with 103,000, let alone all those small towns and city in between, and all the industry and all the resources that are there. Ukraine would have to acknowledge publicly that that those areas are parts of Russia. It would have to give up its claim to it. It would have no international right to ever claim again that this is a part of Ukraine. Russia would, in effect, publicly be acknowledged as the legitimate owner of this territory, and it would publicly be acknowledged to gain this in a war of conquest legitimately, not just occupation, not a de facto occupation, not a de facto owning the area de facto, but de jure. So by law, it would publicly in all the world acknowledge that this is now a legitimate part of Russia. The other talk is a demilitarized zone with NATO forces. It would mean some kind of deterrence, but at the same time, we cannot expect that there will be significant forces in the place to do more than observation. If the US are not participating, how many NATO states are there that can send significant forces? We can talk about some tens of thousands against the Russians on the other side, so this would mostly be just in observational terms, not in a robust mandate that they are capable of holding back the Russians if the Russians ever want to invade again. The European nations simply do not have enough soldiers to stop Russia actively to do more than an observation. Without the US in their back, a tripwire deployment. So to have soldiers there to show to the Russians, the nations who have the soldiers there, will be pulled into a future war, and you have to fight us. If the US is not involved, then where's the deterrence? Are the Russians really afraid of the French army when they are already facing all of what they are facing right now, if the US is not guaranteed to join that in the future? Unless there is this deployment there means that if a Russian aggression restarts, the US will actively get engaged. The deterrence there, a tripwire deployment, will be of very limited effect, and thus the effect against the Russians will be limited as well. without a promise of the US, it's going to be kind of pointless. And we have to understand that fighting outside of NATO territory also does not necessarily lead to Article 5. So even if the French and the British and whoever joins them there are going to engage the Russians once they cross over into the demilitarized zone, even if that happens, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be Article 5, because that's outside of NATO territory, which is not necessarily precondition for Article 5. But even if Article 5 is declared, and you have to acknowledge that everyone needs to agree with that, including Hungary, including Slovakia, including the US, even if it is agreed upon, Article 5 does not necessarily demand military help. It requires appropriate help, but that is up to the discretion of the participating nations. The appropriate help can be someone wishes as well. In Reconstruction, not much surprising here. It was to be expected that the European Union will mostly pay it. The only question would be, does it pay it out of its own pocket or with the Russian money that was frozen? But that European Union will help in rebuilding Ukraine. It was obvious from the beginning, simply out of its own interest, because it's not in the interest of the European Union to have a war-ravaged country right at its outside and as a potential future member. But without any security, a demobilization and the end of martial law will lead to huge numbers of Ukrainian men leaving the country really fast, because they expect that the war might start again fairly soon, and then they will have to go to the front line again, so they better get outside to avoid this. This will lead to a mass flight of men from Ukraine if it's actually going to turn out like this. Let's look at the timetable. The demobilization and the end of the martial law are just 20 days after the ceasefire is signed. So Ukraine can't even really check how it's going to change, and the peacekeepers can't even really deploy when Ukraine is already supposed to demobilize its forces and thus weaken itself against the Russians. The Russians, on their hand, only have martial law in some provinces along the Ukrainian border, so for them giving it up is not much of a loss. And if they obeyed by the rules, they would only have to demobilize those that are left from the 300,000 that they mobilized in a partial mobilization. Everyone among them who they can't convince to sign a contract, whether it's legit or not. The rest of their soldiers, the rest of the forces that they built up during this war are contract soldiers. They are not mobilized. So if we take those claims by its word, they don't have to be demobilized, meaning that the discrepancy between Ukraine and between Russia will rise exorbitant, I think. So massively. It will increase massively. Russia will get significantly stronger within days. Ukraine, on the other hand, as they are mostly made of mobilized personnel, would have to demobilize the majority of its military. Overnight, it would be weak. And obviously, without martial law, the freshly demobilized men might in masses leave the country in addition to all the other men that fear that they might fight in a next war. To come to a conclusion, we first have to say it's unclear whether that's true. The Daily Mail is a tabloid from Great Britain, and I'm pretty sure it has published some not true things in the past, and they only claim it's leaked. They don't claim it's 100% correct. So this might not be the correct peace treaty that Trump is going to propose. It's also not clear whether they actually will demand that Ukraine will give up the territory, because this means that the letter of the Daily Mail does not necessarily give us a clue to that, whether or not Ukraine will have to give it up. But if they have to acknowledge the annexation, then they would have to acknowledge all of the annexation, so including the territory they still occupy. If that means, though, they would lose not only the cities, but all the fortifications there as well. This is the front line now. So this is where the Ukrainians have built several front lines, several lines behind each other, fallback lines to stop the Russians. The Russians would then be able to advance over those within a few days, thus while the Ukrainian army is demobilizing and thus not able to build new fortification lines behind them, it would basically be incapable of defending itself almost immediately. And security guarantees that would aid Ukraine, that would help Ukraine in case of a second attack or a third attack after 2014 and 2022 are far from certain whether they will come. Right now, the Ukraine would be completely helpless. The next question would be about the peacekeepers, the troops in the demilitarized zone. Obviously, we can't make a conclusion there yet. We don't know who is going to participate if it comes to that, how many, and what will be their equipment. Just for argument's sake, I can give you what I mean with this. They could just have assault rifles for self-defense. They could bring heavy weapons, including artillery and tanks, or they could bring tactical nukes, including the explanation that if a war happens, they immediately go into use tactical nukes. As you can imagine, those three options are vastly different in their effect and vastly different in their deterrence. But for those, nations with tactical nukes would have to participate, and they would have to be willing to go that step to threaten the Russians with the usage of tactical nukes. Without security guarantees, with a forced demobilization within 20 days, Ukraine is immediately weakened. Russia, on the other hand, is barely weakened at all. Not just that, they might, if Ukraine has to give up territory, they might gain additional territory and fortifications, depending on how trustworthy, how credible the security troops, the peacekeepers are. This could mean that Russia might attack after just a few weeks to do a next attack. Against the Ukrainian army would have a fraction of its current size. It would have no longer the fortifications if the Ukrainians have to give up the territory. It would face a US president this time who does not want war with Russia, who is not willing to do that, who is willing to give up allies for that, and who has already cast doubt on its promise for alliance in the past. He said it publicly himself: I would encourage Russia to attack you if you don't pay your bill. The only way to stop Russia in that case would be if, for instance, France and the UK are strong of a conviction, have the determination to use nukes. That would be the only thing that could stop Russia at this point, because even if there are 5,000 French soldiers, they can be wiped away in a very short time by the Russians, as the Russians would be vastly superior in numbers and probably in material as well. And if the US is not going to back them up under any circumstances, why would the Russians be too afraid of the French? So even without this, even if this does not happen, even if Russia is not going to attack Ukraine after just a few weeks, it would publicly say to the Russians and to the world, the Russian war of conquest was fine. They are allowed to keep the spoils, and this would obviously lead to others to try the same. We can think about North Korea, we can think about China, we can also think about Venezuela and Guyana and so many other countries. Right now, Rwanda is in the Democratic Republic of Congo with its own troops. There might be things like this as well. This treaty, if it's true, and this is still a question, if it's true, it would be an absolute disaster. It could mean the end of the Ukrainian state within 18 months if they are forced to demobilize, and then if they are forced to give up their fortifications, and then they are not given the aid and the foreign support to deter a renewed Russian offensive while their own fighting age males have left the country. It could mean the end of Ukraine within a year and a half. And at the same time, it would obviously encourage other nations to do something like this, as in these circumstances, the West would show a massive weakness, and the West is the only guarantor of international law in these days. And if the West is not willing to stop an aggressor like this who does war of conquest, then who is? So this is a disastrous plan if it's true. This is still in question, but if it's true, it would likely be not just a serious threat to Ukraine, but the serious threat to the end of Ukraine. And this, on the other hand, might lead to Ukraine simply declining it and continue fighting. I have no idea what Ukraine will do. I have no idea if that plan is actually true, but it's currently being spread around, so it was worth looking into it. And if you appreciate this, then please give it a thumbs up, even though the topic is probably not very positive, but this helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment with your opinion about this. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. You can follow the Ukraine war and its developments here on this channel, and I would obviously love to see you again. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description, but that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.